Welcome back. We're discussing China's increased hold in Africa and its resources. Joining me from New York is Richard Bihar, the award-winning investigative journalist and author of an intensive and investigative study of China's business interests in Africa. In Brussels, we have Dr. John Afele, author and former director of the International Program for Africa at the University of Guelph. And here in Washington, D.C. is David Chin, the former U.S. ambassador to Ethiopia. As we get back to our discussions, Richard, I had an email that came in from Nigeria just now. Marwan Tafida wrote in saying, and I don't have the graphic for it, but I'll just read it to you. It says, "There's development in Africa to say the least, but in Nigeria, the textiles business is a total enslavement of its people by Chinese nationals. In your investigations, to what extent did you find extreme cases of China's business in Africa?"
That is happening. You know, the flip side is that African consumers are able to get cheaper goods, which is the good news. But the bad news is that most countries in the world, to get to the next level of development, have had to further their light manufacturing, light industry, textiles. China's making that almost impossible for African countries to do in one nation after another on the continent. So how is Africa going to take that leap? Africa's share of global world trade is now 2%. It was 6% in the 1960s.
Dr. John Afele, I was reading Richard's article where he says that China's presence in Africa is an upgraded replay of colonialism. Now, of course, Richard has clarified, certain aspects. He said that this is not just China; it's happened with other countries. But I wonder to what extent, from an African perspective, you see that as well.
Well, I think we were not there during the colonial rule, so I don't know how really the situation was. But then I see this as an economic situation. And if it is economics, then Thomas Friedman was writing that economics is not like war. It can be a win-win situation. This is not the time where Africa didn't really have voice, and now the world is watching and can watch the actions of others elsewhere. So I don't think that we can go back to that era of colonialism. The only thing is to have strong investment rules and be able to enforce them. And if Africa needs help in developing those investment conditions, we have international organizations and other donor groups that can help us develop those standards by which countries can play, so we are not colonized again. It should not happen in our lifetime again.
Well, but Ambassador, regardless of what Dr. Fele says, international ratings, affect Africa's image, and it has an image problem. And when international ratings of everything from human rights development to transparency of business to everything else tend to portray a negative image, isn't it a disincentive for businesses, particularly in the US where they follow these a lot more, to come in and do business with Africa?
I think that the perception of Africa in terms of American business does have an awful lot of negativeness to it. I don't think that's caused by China particularly. I'm not sure that's relevant at all. In terms of the colonialism issue, I really think that's a misunderstanding of what's going on. Colonialism imputes political control, and that's just not part of the equation today. If you want to use some sort of definition, maybe mercantilism is closer to what's going on, but not colonialism.
Okay. Well, Richard Bihar, if I could ask you about the corruption aspect. Now, we've touched on it a little bit, but what do you think that the current situation with as you mentioned, China's level of business is considered very corrupt in many ways. What has it done for corruption on the African side, where a lot of the transparency indexes tend to be very negative as well?
Yes, they are. I just want to point out that in the piece, you raised the question of whether this is a replay of colonialism, but we also say it's a little too early to see how it's going to pan out. I'll give you an example of Mozambique on the question you have. Chinese interests are pulling out most of the timber in ways that the good wood will be gone in 5 years if it continues. And this forest depletion is taking place through partnerships between Chinese operators and political and party leaders in Mozambique. That is one way that Chinese operators are able to move resources out, through partnerships with African officials. The same thing's happening in Congo with the movement of copper out through the provinces and ultimately to the mainland.
We have a caller on the line from Nigeria. Monday, what would you like to ask?
What I want to say concerning that exploitation of Africa.
Go on.
The China should not be segregated alone.
Okay. Keep going, Monday.
Okay, so what is happening? They came and they discussed with the country concerned, and the country accepted them in, and they collect revenue for this, and they take what they want.
So I'm presuming, Ambassador, that Monday's perspective is negative, but he's saying that China alone shouldn't get the blame, that they do come and they consult.
If I understood the comment correctly, yes, I would agree with you. Then they shouldn't get full blame. Obviously, all countries around the world have their own interests in terms of their interaction with Africa, and they pursue them. Some do it to greater benefit to Africa than others, but in the final analysis, every country is interested in its own interests.
Well, what upside do you see, though, to this? I mean, we quoted at the beginning that sub-Saharan Africa's economies have grown by about 6% since 2004.
One of the big upsides is that China provides another alternative to Africa, particularly in terms of loans. And China has gone into Africa in a major way, offering long-term, low-interest loans that were only being provided by the West with a lot of political conditions attached. That is good governance, getting rid of corruption, and all of these things the West very much likes. China goes in and says, look, we'll basically give you the same terms, almost the same terms on the loans, but we don't require any of these other conditions.
Now, Richard Bihar, you mentioned in your article about, whether or not it's the case that China's behaving as if natural resources are running out. And I know you gave the example of the stripping of timber, but what other areas do you see China really, trying to make a grab for resources?
Well, experts are debating around the world. We won't settle that here today, whether resources are running out, whether oil has peaked, whether there's 50 or 100 years left of copper. Every year we're losing an area the size of England in terms of forest in the world. Chinese leadership needs to feed their machine, no matter what it takes. They're behaving as if the world's running out of resources while the experts debate it, and they're moving into Africa in that way heavily. Now, if China's economy does not grow at least 9% a year, they will put 25 million people every year in unemployment, and they've already got 80,000 social protests a year in China. The communist leadership knows this is a problem. They've got to feed the machine.
Dr. John Ofele, I want to get your perspective on this idea that some people put out that in a way it's easier for African countries to do business with China because China's perceived as another developing country as opposed to the US, for example, which is seen as a developed country and perhaps to that extent being a little more imperialistic. Now, to what extent might that be true?
Well, the relationship between Africa and China, as we know, is not new. Because especially at the time of independence, a lot of the countries had relationships with China. Of course, the level is different now. It's more intensified. It's been intensified. We talk about the Tanzam Railway, railway line from Tanzania to Zambia, interest-free Chinese loan, long time ago. We have situations that people who think they have similar situations tend to band together. And in this case, one has become a little bit better off, but has not forgotten the other poorer countries with which it dealt or with which it had relationships in the past. So there is this more like an umbilical cord that we were together before, and now we are better off, but we still remember that we have been friends and will help you. But the main thing must be that the African leaders, we cannot put our faith totally in African leaders, especially when there is no good governance on the continent. Therefore, the structures within which China operates in Africa should be subjected to international scrutiny. But we want to say that the African must be made, or the African must evolve to question some of these things themselves and set the rules. So it doesn't matter who comes, there will be rules within which you operate.
Okay, well, gentlemen, I have to say, unfortunately, we're out of time there. I know we had a caller on the line, Caesar in the UK. I apologize. Thank you for standing by. Hopefully, we'll get you on a call next time. But, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for this debate. And I hope we get a chance to follow this story sometime in the future as well.
Thank you.
And, of course, thank you for being with us. So the next show is about Nelson Mandela as he celebrates his 90th birthday. We'll see you next time.